Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is January 3rd, and we are still on vacation for the new year. Happy 2024. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. I have decided, even though it's going to be fairly long, this is going to be a little bit over an hour today. I took all of Lance's interviews because I had broken his show up into two segments, one where we talked about his books and one where we talked about his movie directing. Instead, for this holiday special, I decided to put the whole thing together so you get his entire interview from beginning to end in one episode. So stick around. You're going to love this. He is so much fun. This guy is so accomplished and has just so much information to share with you. I'm not going to talk a lot because it is such a long show. So let's just get right to it. Here we go with a rebroadcast of episodes 55 and 56 with Lance Steen Anthony Nielsen. Today, we have got such a fantastic guest for you. He has got just so much good information. I am talking about Lance Steen Anthony Nielsen, who happens to be a writer, a playwright, and a director. He is just multi-talented. I swear, I don't know if there's anything that this man can't do. And besides that, he's just a charming guy who you will love to hear from because he's so much fun to talk to. Now, before we get into this, I do need to add that you will hear 3 beeps during this interview, and that is intentional because I had to edit out a word, and it's the same word all 3 times. I'm sure you'll be able to figure out what it is. Because some of the hosting sites might ding it for censorship if I didn't do that. And I didn't want the audience to be reduced down due to NC-17 rating. But you will be able to figure out what the word is. So I'm not going to give a lot of blather, just going to get right to it. So please welcome to the show, Lance Steen Anthony Nielsen, the only man I know who has almost as many names as I do. So the way that I wanted to do this, because you're a special case.
I've been told that many times, by various medical professionals and friends.
You and I have been friends online for quite a while. We've never actually met in person.
Yeah. But anyway, we got connected and are now in the independent writer trenches together.
Well, and plus we found out we had so much in common. I mean, for one thing, in college, you were working in a movie theater. I worked in a movie theater for years, and we both are like huge movie fans. And whenever I was in college, I actually did write a couple of like movie projects and film them for college. I never followed up on that after college. No. But then it's like we were both writing books and we had so much in common. Then we both found out that we had memory problems too.
Yeah, we definitely have that in common. What was that again? Yeah, we definitely have that in common. Yeah.
And we're always just trying to keep each other going. It's like, okay, do you remember how to do this? Okay, I remember how to do that. Okay, I'll show you this.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing with me is ever since I had my brain damage back in 2004, I think it was. Let's see, I can't actually even remember the year. Not only have I got portions of my memory missing, but I have major memory retention issues. So I have to be doing something day in, day out, every day to remember how to do it like it's a routine. Mm-hmm. If I'm only going into my Vellum program to insert a certain thing in a certain way on a certain paragraph, once or twice a year, every time I come back to do it again, I never remember it. I'm sure getting old is probably a factor as well. But I mean, this was definitely a marked difference after I got out of hospital. There were various things I had issues with. I mean, I couldn't even walk properly because I was in for so long, so it took me a long time for my body to regain its strength. And of course, the abscess was in my brain, or there were 2 of them, and they were really huge. And there's scars where they used to reside. So that, I believe, is sort of what caused kind of bits of my memory to fragment. And it's like somebody took a big chunk of my life and a section from a certain year to a certain year, dropped that bowl of glass on the floor, and they shattered it, and it's all kind of mixed up. And somebody got back in touch with me on Facebook, a student who I used to go to art college with recently, and she even sent me pictures of me from my year and her, but I don't remember her. I've got no memory of her at all. You know, and I've since discovered that during the time we were at college, we were actually quite close friends. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I definitely understand that.
Yeah, so that's what led me to writing the book. Maybe I should talk about this now. That's as we're on the topic. That's what's led me to writing my latest book, because I found a diary that I thought I'd lost when I moved house because I hadn't seen it for so long. I just thought maybe I'd thrown it away. And it's the diary I kept, not every day, but I think probably 2/3 of the days have got entries in, maybe 3/4 even, from the year 1988. And that's a lot of important things happened for me that year. I'd just come out of a relationship. I just started art college. I went to America for the first time. I also saw over 130 movies, many of them for the first time, including 37 in America alone.
Wow.
I took 22 people to see Die Hard for my birthday at the very first screening of Die Hard in the UK, which was at the London Film Festival on the 27th of November, 1988, at 10 o'clock in the morning in the Odeon Leicester Square, and nobody knew why they were turning up at such an ungodly hour in the morning, all hungover from previous nocturnal activities, you know, but they were over the moon after they'd seen the movie because it's such a great film.
Oh, yeah.
So this friend of mine, Dee, who got in touch with me, she's in the diary quite a bit. And when I was reading through it, there were sort of little bits and pieces that were kind of flashing back to me. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to turn this into a book. The book's called 1988, and it's a complete translation of my diary. But what I'm doing is I'm adding footnotes under the entries about what I can remember now, or just little additional comments about that person, that entry, or that individual as me now, as opposed to the Dawson's Creek sort of dramatized life that I had. It does read like an episode of Dawson's Creek. It really, the whole diary. And then I'm also reviewing all the movies.
Oh, nice.
So it's like a diary and a movie review book. And I actually think of all the books I've done, this one might be that one that somehow captures a weird zeitgeist that people might love it and it might blow up. I don't know. I've just got a feeling about it. So, yeah. And I'm keeping everybody's names. I'm not changing any of the names. So obviously there'll be friends of mine from back then who may grab a copy and read some things and go, oh, you know, but I'm just going to keep everybody's names the same. Yeah. So that's the next book I've got coming out, 1988.
Whenever you went through your brain injury, did you notice that you lost a lot of your language skills? Because I know that was true for me.
Well, I had a stroke, which was the first indication that something was wrong. I had a stroke and collapsed while I was working at my computer, and my girlfriend at the time called in my flatmate. And then the next thing I knew, the ambulance people were there, and I was constantly going in and out of consciousness. And I can't, it's all such a blur, but I was in a coma. They put me in a coma for a bit because I had such a big swelling in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to remember because it's a long time ago. The main things I remember when I came out, because I was in hospital for 3 months, the main things I remember when I came out was because I'd hardly had any exercise, my legs were really tired. You know, they felt like I was walking on matchsticks.
Mm-hmm.
And everything about me felt really frail. And I used to be a skateboarder. I wasn't a very good one. I realized I had no sense of balance, so I couldn't stay on my board. So my skateboarding days were over. When I walked down the street, and this still happens to me occasionally, I'd get a sudden loss of balance and the pavement rushing up to my face. I think my language, once I was out of hospital, I think my speaking ability was fine. I mean, I was back directing another play as soon as I could do so. If anything, I was kind of more conscious of how life was quite delicate and we could go at any time.
Well, I wasn't talking about your ability to speak, but more about your ability to remember words and what they mean.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's a difficult one because back then I wasn't writing novels. I got into writing novels very late. I was writing plays predominantly. And so the use of language in a play is obviously very different to the use of language in a novel. You need to convey thoughts, dialogue, tone, characters, emotions to an audience very clearly and define the characters on stage as well as you can, be that upfront or subtly. And it all depends on the scripts and the setting. But the complex array of text and language and, description and so on that you would use in a book as opposed to what you would use on stage is nowhere near the same.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I got down to writing a book, we're talking a decade and a half from when I had the brain injury. So from what I can tell, I wasn't conscious of that at the time, but it might well have been the case. I'm trying to remember what the play was that I did immediately after I was in hospital. And I have a feeling it was Making Time, which was a response in part to what had happened, which was about three friends and that one of them dies before the end of the play, and they don't make time in life to do the things that are important. They're just constantly kind of trying to wade their way through their problems,
Mm-hmm.
But they meet every year, once a year. So it kind of goes for about 15 years. I don't recall having any difficulties writing that, but I can't really answer that question accurately because it's so long ago.
Well, I remember my brain injury was about the same time as yours. I had the accident in 2002, but they didn't do the surgeries until 2004.
Right.
So that's when I had all my brain surgeries and had the trauma. But I remember about a year after the last surgery, I was trying to explain to my mother that I needed to buy a photo album, but I couldn't think of photo album. I could sit there and tell her, it's like, okay, it's a book and there are pages and you put pictures in it. I could sit there and describe what it was and what you did with it, but I could not think of photo album.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And when she's like, are you talking about a photo album? I'm like, oh my God, yes. I mean, the amount of frustration that I had it's like, I knew those words. I knew what it was.
I'm sorry, I have a clearer idea of exactly what you're talking about now. And I think the correct term for me would be, or the correct phrasing of the question would be, after the accident, was I conscious of the fact that in certain situations or at times I would find myself reaching for words that should have been obvious?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? And actually the answer to that question is yes, because now you've put it to me that way. I can think of many occasions where I'd be going, no, that thing, that obvious thing. A fountain. Yeah, that happened quite a lot actually. And that definitely didn't used to happen before. So yeah, I think that's, again, the part of my brain that's got the scar in it is, there's a name for it. I don't know whether it's hippopotamus campus or, it's not that. I don't know if it's that one, but it's the part of the brain where the memory is stored, is where I've got my scar. So that's what's been denigrated, long-term memory. I think there's a short-term memory section of the brain, and there's the long-term where stuff gets stored.
Mm-hmm.
The scar is in that bit. So, but yeah, I was definitely reaching for words sometimes. That still happens now, actually, occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I know for me, I got into writing as a way to do like physical therapy for my brain and to revive my language skills.
Right.
Do you notice that as you write more that it helps you with that?
Definitely. I mean, it's funny because I'd always wanted to write a book, but until the self-publishing window opened up for people, it always seemed so difficult to get into, much like, the music industry, much like the film industry. It's run by a fairly small elite in the grand scheme of things, and it's quite hard to pry open those doors unless they see that you've got a huge following and done half the work yourself already, and they can see pound signs.
Yeah.
And so I never thought that writing novels would be an option for me, really. And then when this film project stalled, very important film project that I was working on for a long time, I thought, now I'm going to write that book, because I knew by then there were friends of mine who were getting books out, and I went to the London Book Fair, which I'm sure you've probably been to before. And that was very useful in terms of the talks they had, and also the huge kind of writer's corner where all the writers go. And I met David Bellacci, who's a very well-known American writer.
Yeah,
And,
that would be very nice.
I was the only person who got a personal photo with him because I ran straight up to him as soon as he finished his talk. And I said, please let me get a photo with you, David, because I found what he said so inspirational. And I went out and I bought one of his books, and I could see why his books were so successful. They're so easy to get into and process and go through. You know, they very much are airport thrillers that you pick them up at the airport and read them on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I think somebody asked the question, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to a new writer? And he said, if you can say what you've written in 200 words, in 2 words, say it in 2. And I went back to my book, my first book, Diamonds in the Sky, which we can talk about in a little bit if you want to.
Yes.
And I mean, it's a meaty novel, my first book. And I mean, it's not just because I'm a first-time writer, and as a first-time writer, of course, we overwrite everything. But it is because it's a big epic story. I wanted it to feel like a Lord of the Rings book. I wanted somebody to pick the book up and go, this is big. This is a big story. Because it is. It's supposed to be an epic, you know. But I went through and I was like, right, if I can say it in 2. And I went through and I chopped out huge swathes of text. I mean, I cut something like 150 pages from my first draft. And I think I just finished the first draft when I first went to the London Book Fair. And then the second time I went, I actually had my book with me.
Wow, that's actually like cutting out an entire novella out of your book.
It was a beast. I mean, my first draft was, you know, you've got to think Lord of the Rings. This is an epic book series. There's supposed to be 6 of them. I've done 2. I should have had the 3rd one out by now.
Well, you've been a little busy.
Yeah, a lot going on in my personal life, and that can really impact what you can deliver on as a creative. And my characters are very human, and they're very complex, and a lot of them are very broken and going through sort of emotionally difficult times. When you're dealing with that yourself as well, sometimes it's great and you can pour everything into the text, and sometimes you don't want to do that. And at the moment, I'm sort of processing too much on my own to dive into book number 3. I mean, I've got a lot of it written, but I'm not going to be ready to finish it because I want it to be good. You know, I don't want to mess it up.
Well, and plus sometimes it's a little bit easier if you have a little distance from the situations, and when things are too new and too raw, it can be too difficult.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, to go back to the origins of your question, so, you know, I kind of fell into writing novels almost by accident, but it was something that I always wanted to do. It just so happened that a misfortune on another project in my other job enabled me to have a window where I could write a book. And I thought, if not now, when, you know? Mm-hmm. And I wasn't even sure if I could do it. And I'm sure if I would go back and write the first novel again now, even after it had been published, it had been released, and there'd been quite a few reviews, and I think I've had 55 reviews, and 53 of them have been 5 stars out of 5.
Oh, nice.
And 2 of them have been 4 stars out of 5 for book 1. But I went back in and I edited it again, and I actually cut more of it out. So the people that have got it when it very first came out have got a slightly longer version. I did a bit of a George Lucas and kind of went back in and changed my film, you know. No, yeah, it's George Lucas who did that with E.T. Anyway, but I have found it a really helpful medium, because I've actually found that since I started writing novels, the quality of my script writing, which I think I consider myself a very good script writer, is even better now, because my range of language is now much broader, because I'm doing that thing, I guess, that all writers do. I haven't spoken to enough to qualify that statement, but I'm doing that thing where, you know, grab the thesaurus. Is there a different word I can use for such and such in this line?
Oh, yeah.
I haven't heard of that word before, but that sounds good. That makes my character sound intelligent, and I want that character to sound intelligent, like he went to Oxford to study English or whatever. So I have found that it's definitely increased my language abilities, and also impacted in a positive way my script writing abilities. So
tell us about the first book.
So the first book I wrote was a story that I'd wanted to write for a long time. I'm a big UFO buff. Saw a UFO with another friend of mine called Matthew Soul, who, if you ever hear this, please get in touch. He used to go to Arundel House School with me, and we were both in detention one lunchtime, and we saw this white disc really far up in the sky. It was a bright blue day with a few clouds. And the thing that I remember about this disc was it was like someone had thrown it across the sky, and it was like the clouds were rocks, and it bounced off of every cloud. So it was like it almost deliberately kept itself visible. And I mean, this was no weather balloon or anything like that. It was absolutely cylindrical. You could see that it was some sort of craft. And I saw it first, and I said, Matthew, look up there. And he saw it, and it went so quickly. We only both saw it for literally about 4 seconds. And God, it was quick. I mean, it was so fast. And it did maneuvers that were completely impossible for any kind of plane, because it would like just, zoom towards one cloud, then do a 90-degree angle straight up again, and then do another 90-degree angle.
Wow.
So, after that, I bought all books, UFOs, which back in the day was about 4 books. The Osborne Big Book of UFOs, Giles Brandis Guide to UFOs. And then there was a guy who was a notorious faker, who said he'd been visited by aliens and wrote lots of books, and it was a big heap of bullshit. But he had a big cult of followers, and the UFOs looked like a tea kettle. And there's a famous photograph that he said he took of these
Interesting.
UFOs.
I'm going to have to Google that later.
Yeah, I can't remember who that was. It's a very famous name. See, now my brain is reaching for, because I could, before I would have that name on the tip of my tongue, but the photograph is a very famous photograph that people have said is fake, and I think it's fake, and it's supposed to be a tea kettle cover or something, the flying saucer. Anyway, so that's the sort of origin to my interest in UFOs. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a story where 200 of these identical UFOs arrive on the Earth, all over the planet, all different times of day. So they're all filmed by the press, they're all seen by the people, so no one could deny that they're here. Mm-hmm. So far, so Independence Day, except that unlike Independence Day, these UFOs don't do anything. They don't fire beams or start blowing up cities. They drill down into the Earth. They're kind of shaped like spinning tops. And the lower half of them goes under the ground, and the upper half of them sits there like a huge white tower in the center. And after they've landed, some of them change size. So the biggest ones are like 50 miles across, and the smallest one, like the one that lands in Scotland in the UK, is like 10 miles across. But nothing happens. There's no invasion. No one comes out. And no matter what the scientists do all over the world, no one can get in them. No drill bits will penetrate them. They just break and so on. And that's the backdrop to the story. And the book is basically about 10 very dysfunctional characters. I think there's 8 of them in the first book. There's 10 by the end of the second book. There's 2 new characters introduced in each book. And I kind of set a rule as well that one character at least was going to die in every book, because I never want the reader to feel safe about getting too attached to people. And every book ends on a cliffhanger. The first book is set over the first 3 days. And the idea is that the 8 characters are all from different backgrounds, cultural ethnicities. They're all from very different walks of life. You've got a camel trader from the town of Fada, which is the most remote town in the middle of Chad. I've been on Google Earth, and that's how I picked it out. And I had to research all the background, what they eat, what they wore. And I find that as a writer, that's a really great part of the process for me, is finding out about these places on Earth that I haven't been, and what would that person be like, and how would they speak, and what would their priorities in their life be, and all this kind of thing. And this guy's a camel trader, and he's from a time that's dying, when the remotest towns in Chad, you would have these camel traders that would travel from town to town, delivering things like spices and food basics and so on. And occasionally they'd bring some Duracell batteries for someone's Walkman or whatever. But that way of life is dying now, because there's hardly any towns now that are not somehow connected to the larger world. And this guy started off with a 40 herd of camel train, and now he's down to his last 3, and he's named them all, and he talks to them. And he's the first guy who gets to go inside one of the ships, who's like a poor guy who's out of time, no longer in sync with the world, hasn't got a university education or anything like that. He's just a working class man who cares about his family, and he's the first guy that gets to go inside one of the spaceships when everybody else has failed. Then you've got the Prime Minister of the UK as another character. He in turn is having an affair with a transsexual Brazilian who's living in London, who's also his dealer. So he's having with her on the night when the spaceships arrive. You then have a French Moroccan terrorist who is in Paris, who shoots down a plane full of very important dignitaries the night of anti-terrorism conference in France that coincides with the ships arriving. So his timeline is another story. There's an American woman called Dianne who's on the cover of the first book, and she is traveling across America on, is it Highway 41 or the loneliest road in America, they call it? I forget the number. And she's traveling along that when one of the ships that lands in America nearly lands on top of her, and she barrel rolls her car when she's trying to escape out from underneath it. So you follow all these very different characters through the first 72 hours of these ships arriving and what happens to them. And gradually the storylines of these characters are going to converge. You've got an African immigrant who lives in Scotland called Blessing. She's one of my favourite characters, who's very, very religious. And she ends up going on this bus with a Scottish driver whose nickname is Elvis, who's a karaoke Elvis impersonator. And he knows he's dying of cancer. And he decides when he sees the spaceship land in Scotland, he's just going to take his bus and go and drive around it. He wants to go and see it. So he tells everybody on his bus, get off unless you want to come and see the spaceship. And she stays on the bus and goes with him, along with two students who've just dropped ecstasy pills and an old lady. And that's another storyline. So that's basically the first book, and the second one picks up where the first book ends. The first book ends on a massive cliffhanger, and the second book is called The Orphans of Babylon, because a load of the children name the ship that they get inside. They call it Babylon, after the Gardens of Babylon. Mm-hmm. And that picks up the story of all these characters again, and it's the next 6 weeks. So first book is the first 3 days, and the second book is the next 6 weeks, I think it is, or 6 weeks, 2 months, something like that.
And so what is the actual name of the first one?
Diamonds in the Sky, Perusia.
Perusia. That's the part that I can never remember.
And the second one is called Diamonds in the Sky, The Orphans of Babylon. Now, that book was originally going to be called Diamonds in the Sky, Arrival. And I told everybody, I've got this book coming out, it's called Arrival. And then the byline was going to be Diamonds in the Sky. And I thought Arrival was a great name for a book about UFOs arriving. And I get a phone call one day and said, Lance, I've just sent you a link on your Facebook. Check it out. And I put it on. And there's this trailer for this movie about spaceships arriving all over the earth called Arrival, directed by Denis Villeneuve, who directed the new Dune film. And I've actually met Denis because I was at the premiere of Dune, and I really wanted to tell him, dude, you usurped me. I had to change the name of my book because of you. But when I went to watch the Arrival movie, there's nothing in it other than some spaceships arrive on Earth. That's the only thing about it that's the same. Who's in the spaceships, why they're here, what the film means, all of that stuff. There's no relation to my story whatsoever. But I thought, I can't call it Arrival. I have to call it something else.
And you've been working on part 3?
Yeah, I've done about 3 chapters. Every book is the same format. Every book's got 12 chapters. And every chapter is divided into 3 segments. So there are 36 segments in the book, and each segment is a different character's POV. So I've kind of set myself a bit of a hard task because I've only got 36 segments in each book to share between however many characters' stories I want to tell in that book in that time frame. And that was quite tricky in the second book because I added a couple of new characters.
Do you think that would give you reason to kill off a few more to just make the story simpler to tell?
The funny thing is, right, is I already know what the last scene of the last book is. Mm-hmm. I have the ending very, very clear in my head. I know why the ships are here. I know what they're doing. I know what they are and all of that. And because what you come to realize as the story unfolds is that they let certain people inside and they don't let other people in. And you'll come to understand how that works as the books unfold. But in the second book, you get to see inside the ships properly because the name of the second book, The Children of Babylon, it's a group of children who were being sex trafficked who get led to safety inside one of the ships. And that's where they form a community separate from the world because they decide the world is evil, which it is. So especially now, it's even more evil than when I mean, do you know what the funny thing is? It is in the foreword of my first book, which was written in 2017, and it's in quotes on the first page. It says, "The world has never been more divided." And then I think my next line in the foreword is, "Mankind appears to be taking a massive step backwards." And that was in 2017. And now I think about all the kind of horrible acts of inhumanity that have happened since then, perhaps most notably the war in Ukraine and so on. God, we really are going backwards. You know, COVID, yeah. The way that we responded to that and was not the best of humanity by any means. Yeah, just, you know, the way we're dealing with all the poverty now and immigration and just, we're not creating long-term solutions. We're creating short-term solutions that are poor at best usually, and we're creating bigger long-term problems. And we seem to specialize at doing that, which is a real shame. So I didn't want my book series to be, I didn't want to kind of jump on that bandwagon of here's a big political message for you. I just wanted to tell stories about people that were all dysfunctional, because all the characters in the book are all based on people I know. You know, that doesn't mean that I know a terrorist. I don't, but the personas of all the characters I've taken up. This guy's a bit like this friend of mine, and then I've added other things. So that way I've made the characters feel very real and believable. You should feel like this could be a person you would know, even if they're from a different culture than you. So yeah, so that's Diamonds in the Sky, and the first two of them are out on Amazon now. I think I've got about 7 books on Amazon now, something like that.
Now, all the other ones that you have are your scripts, right?
Yeah, so they're a mixture of plays and screenplays.
One of the things that I was wondering about, if you are one of the plotters that you plot out everything, or do you do more like pantser that you know what the ending's going to be and just kind of like let it flow until you get to that point?
I am a big fan of plotting to a degree. I mean, my friend Will Jordan, who's a pretty successful author, he's got about 30 books out, and he's actually published with an agent and a publisher, and all of those things we all wish we had a lovely relationship with. He's a big plotter fan, and he will do what I would do with a screenplay, which is I'll write a fairly detailed treatment of what my screenplay is going to be. My approach to my novel writing was a little bit more organic in the sense that I had characters that I wanted in the book, and I didn't know which side of the argument they were going to end up on, because the world is going to become ultimately divided over this singular issue of these ships and what to do with them. And all of the characters will end up falling on one side or other of that argument. I knew how the series as a whole was going to end. I knew who the last characters were in that final scene. And I also wrote the book series to be a television series. So my approach to each book is one season, and each season is around 10 episodes. And like I said, there's 12 chapters. So once I'd done the first book, I decided I wanted to keep the same framework for each book, which was 12 chapters, 3 segments, 36 segments, divided between however many characters I decide to have. And I would write a timeline out for each character, and I'd pin it up on a board. So Joy waits for father at home. Joy gets attacked by uncle. Father kills uncle. Joy and father go to school to get the orphans to take them to the ship. Dennis, the sex trafficker, turns up and shoots Joy, and so on. These are scene headings, which I would then transpose into chapter segments or entire chapters. And I would do the same technique for a script. I'd write a list of headings out, and I used to put them on postcards and stick them all up on a wall. Now I just do them as a list because I'm pretty quick. But so I think I'm a 75% plotter, and I agree with doing a lot of work beforehand, because you just make the job so much easier for yourself. You can find yourself writing yourself into a hole that you can't get out of, and then you've got to just rewrite a whole load of stuff. But I'm going to caveat with that I think it's really important to also be able to stay organic, because your brain will give you amazing ideas as you build your world, as you tell your story, your characters. You suddenly come up with these amazing nuggets of gold. And I think it's quite important to have a decent degree of flexibility so that you can put those nuggets in, because I came up with 3 amazing twists in a row for the end of book 1, and they all went in because they went in 3 different people's timelines. So, this person's timeline ends and you're like, oh, what's going to happen with him? And that's what you want the reader thinking. And then, same with the next one and same with the next one.
I have tried that a few times. I have tried to plot out my book, and it always ends up going way off course at some point where my brain is just like, yeah, that's a cute little outline. We're not going to go anywhere near that. We're going to go over here. And I still, every once in a while, I try again, but I cannot seem to do it.
I think it depends on how strong and cohesive the storyline is to begin with. Like I've just said to you, I've got the final scene for it because it's designed to be 6 books. It might end up being more because I'm not sure I can fit all the stories into just 6. I might end up with a Wheel of Time epic, someone having to come in and do the final few books after I've gone. But I mean, hopefully not. But, having said that, I've got this amazing ending and I can see it and I can hear the characters' dialogue right now as I'm talking to you. I haven't written it yet. That doesn't mean that as I'm coming to the end of book 6, suddenly my brain might go, oh, but what if? Oh, yeah, that's even better. And, that will go in. But like I said, it depends how an outline is just an outline. It's the bare bones of a story from start to finish. And as you start to put the meat on those bones, it can take all different kind of shapes. It can turn into a completely different animal. I mean, we could get into a whole plethora of other topics around this on who are you writing the book for? What's your market? And, who are you expecting to read it? And so on and so on and so on. And also how important are those things? But for me, my bottom line is I always want to tell an interesting story with characters that people will either care about or relate to or find familiar. If I can hit one of those 3 things with the reader, with each character I introduce them to, actually you could go 4 or they just hate them, which is also good because you want your reader to hate certain characters because that's also a good emotional response for someone to have.
Yeah, true.
Oh, I hate this person. What's going to happen to them? It's going to make them turn the page. So if you can hit one of those 4 things with every character, if you can hit more than one, you're doing a damn good job. And I found writing the second book a lot easier than writing the first one was really hard for me. And I was packing a lot into it and I couldn't afford a proper editor. So I was learning to self-edit and I've got really brutal at doing that now. So I'm pretty good at that.
So, plus whenever you're doing the first book in a planned series, that's where you're building your world.
Yeah.
You have to get it all explained to carry over to all the others. So there's a lot that goes into like the first of a series.
Yeah, I mean, although my book is a science fiction drama, but it's set now. In terms of my world building, my main concern was I had to make sure things were accurate. So there was a lot of like, for example, with the mother with the 2 kids who's on the loneliest road in America, there was a lot of Google Earth walking of, there's a cafe that she stops off at, a trucker's cafe. That's a real cafe that I found that's just outside of a town called Fallon. And Fallon is now where the Top Gun Navy fighter school is based. It used to be at Miramar, but it's moved. And I didn't know that. And funny enough, you go on Google Earth and you search a bit west of this truck stop. In the 20 miles between it and the town of Fallon, north and south of the highway, you poke around on Google Earth, you can see all these bunkers with fighter jets on the runway. And I was thinking like, wow, the US Navy hasn't taken the time to blur these bits out. Like, you find if you go over Russia and stuff, there's all these bits blurred out. I was amazed at that, but that was great for me because when this UFO lands, it's so big, it covers up part of that area. So I was able to write that into the text that, a load of Navy personnel had disappeared and nobody knew if they were alive or dead because they were under the ship and this kind of thing. So I had to make sure all of that stuff was accurate because I wanted it to be believable, but I probably didn't have to do quite as much work or a different kind of work, say, as somebody writing a book set in the kingdom of Thrud. And, you've got the Gamorreans living in the town of Gugu and the Philistines living in the town of Carrot or whatever. And I didn't have to do all of that.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to do quite as much legwork with world building because my world is already there. I just had to make sure where my world intersected with my sci-fi story that it did so in the most accurate way possible. And I went all out on that. Tried to sort of read up what the response of the American military would be. And I would speak to friends of mine in the army, what would the British military do in this situation, that kind of thing. So there was a lot of that sort of research that went on, and stuff like a COBRA, which I don't know if you've heard of COBRA, but that's the emergency committee. So if there's an act of terrorism in England, COBRA will immediately be called into, it's like the Joint Chiefs, it's immediately called up, and you've got the head of the police, the head of the military, and the head of all the intelligence services. All these representatives will all meet to combat whatever the threat is. So I've got scenes with COBRA in the book, for example. So all of that stuff had to be correct. So yeah, there was a lot of research involved for me rather than me creating endless notes about my world, because my world already existed. But I guess that's world building as well. It's just slightly different for a book that's set now.
Now, do you enjoy the research part?
Yeah, because I've written quite a lot of historical screenplays. I'm a big history buff. And I'm very interested in other cultures. I've been to Africa, and I've been to quite a few places in Europe, America, of course. And I find other cultures and the differences between us and the way we live and our lifestyles. It's fascinating, isn't it, to think somebody rolled the dice somewhere and you got born in America, or I got born in South Africa, eventually brought up in London. There was a lot of people that rolled the dice and got born in Syria and Lebanon and, places that have been in a state of conflict for God knows how long. So, yeah, researching the character of Amari, who's the camel trader guy, and his daughter is one of the characters in the book as well, Joy. Writing Amari was just great because I knew nothing about those people, and he comes from a certain tribe, and that tribe has very specific culture of food, clothing, religion, approaches to marriage, all of that stuff. And also the town of Fada. I mean, if you look it up on Google Earth, it is in the middle of nowhere. It's not connected by any roads. There is a small airport just outside the town. But I'll tell you one of the things that's interesting about it is, like I said, I wrote that book in 2017 and I found Fada on Google Earth, and I actually pinpointed where the school was in the story and where Amari's house was. I picked his house out on Google, and you haven't got Google Street View. The Google Earth car hasn't gone to Fada because there's no roads to Fada, But right outside the town, there is an airport. And by that, I mean, there's a concrete strip in the middle of the desert and a hut. So planes can get in and out of there, and that airport becomes a big sort of feature in the book. But what I noticed when I looked at it recently, I went on Google and I looked at it recently, it's doubled in size, the town, even since 2017. In 5 years, the numbers of huts, the numbers of buildings, the numbers of compounds that have been built and created doubled in size. So in that short time, that town has increased hugely, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And I think the life expectancy of a male in Chad is 56.
Wow.
Yeah, it's because the life out there is hard. You're living in the middle of the desert, and this town is all centered around an oasis as well. So, if that oasis went, that town would die. If anyone wants to look up Fada, it's spelled Fada. Literally, just put Fada Chad into Google Earth and you'll see how remote it is.
Okay, so I think this would be a good question for you too, because just the way that you're talking about this one town, do you ever find yourself going down a rabbit hole whenever you're doing research? Do you just keep getting so fascinated with something and you have to force yourself to quit at some point?
I think as writers, we're very good at finding excuses not to write.
True.
We do that all the time. And I think you just picked up on one of them, which is, you're halfway through a chapter. Oh, I've got to check, what would he be eating in this scene? Do I know that? Maybe I don't. So I'll go on and I'll go on Google and I'll, look up what's this person eating and blah, blah, blah. And then I might find something else out. And then, suddenly, next thing you know, I'm on YouTube looking at a video, and then, oh, look, there's that trailer for that film I wanted to see. Oh, quick, let's watch that. And before you know it, 4 hours have passed and you've only written 2 lines. When I was writing the first Diamonds in the Sky book, I was very strict with myself. I said, I'm going to write an absolute minimum of an hour a day, but my target is 4 hours a day. And some days I did 11. And I had a target of pages as well, which was, I kept my minimum low because that way, if I was having a really bad day and I really wasn't feeling it, I knew I only had to write, I think, a page or 2 pages, whatever I set my minimum target. My ideal target was like 5 or 6. And then some days I would do 22. So that's what I did. And I think setting targets is really important, but have a minimum that's easy to reach, but just make sure you always do the minimum. Because if you set a target for yourself that's too high, on a day when you're tired, you'll go, oh, I can't write 7 pages today. And that's it. That's a day when you haven't done anything. So I made sure that I worked on the book 5 days a week minimum, always did a minimum of an hour. But to be honest, I think most days I would get up, I would do 4 hours straight off the bat and take a break. And then I'd maybe do another 2 or 3. So I was typically working on it about 7 hours a day. And it was only on a day when, like, I was going to be going out to the cinema in the afternoon or something. Right, quickly do an hour in the morning, get changed, have some lunch, go out. So, yeah, but rabbit holes are deadly. You've got to watch out for those. I didn't find I wasn't going down rabbit holes and making massive story changes unless I found something out where a particular character from a particular background, military service culture, definitely wouldn't do that sort of thing because... And I can't think of an example of that, but I'm sure there must have been one where I changed something because I found out something that just contradicted the reality. And I'm a big advocate of not breaking the rules of the reality that you create. Keep everything in my books very believable, and people die as well. A lot of characters in the book get killed. Spoiler alert. 2 of the main characters die in the first book. Don't get attached to them, but... Yeah, quite a lot of the supporting characters get killed as well as, there's some pretty tragic deaths in the book.
Well, and given your premise, I think it would be really hard to accept the fact that nobody dies in this kind of a situation.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that the ships are not directly responsible for anyone being killed, but indirectly, they're responsible for a lot of people getting killed, But, you need to read the books to find out.
And where are they all available?
So Diamonds in the Sky book 1 and 2 are both available on Amazon all over the world. If you're in America, you want to order it on Amazon.com. Don't do what some of my American friends did, which was order it via .uk because it took about 6 weeks to arrive. But if you're in the UK, order it off .co.uk. I mean, it's available everywhere. It's all the Amazon sites, so they're all available on there. And then my new novel, 1988, I'm about a third of the way through that. I think that's going to come out in the summer sometime. Nice. But I'm going to put it out as soon as I can because I've got 3 other books I want to drop this year. So, so there's a queue. So I need to get moving. Yeah,
because you're such a slacker. I mean, you really need to start working harder.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to make sure I get my stuff out there while I'm still breathing because I don't know what happens to books on Amazon when the writers pass away. I hope they just don't get taken down. I hope they're always still available. I'm not sure what happens there, but
I don't know. If Amazon is still making money off of them, I'm sure that they'll let them stay up.
Well, I'm fairly confident that I'm going to be this massively discovered talent that's going to be hugely talked about after my passing. And, had I been alive, I would have made loads of money. I just got a horrible feeling that that's going to happen. But, well, we'll see. Hopefully I'll sell a few before then.
Yeah, let's see. We'll just have to figure a way to make that happen before then.
Yeah, I mean, that would be good, especially with all the increase in cost in living. And yeah, I mean, I tell you what, it's funny, actually, because the core message of my book series is what if all the powerful people in the world, all the rich people in the world, what if they no longer had any power over you? what would that mean for society and the human race as a whole? How would things change? And that's kind of the question that the ships pose for humanity. And that's what I was talking about when the characters end up on one side of that argument or another. I really do parallel a lot of social themes. I'm not beating a drum of any particular political message, and I don't stand on one side of politics or the other. Somebody said, "Oh, Lance, you're a lefty," the other day, and I said, "No, I'm not actually. I might have done a lot of social issue plays, but there isn't one political party in my country I could vote for in all good conscience, knowing that I believe in everything that they believe in. You know, I've got different beliefs about different topics. Life's more complicated than that."
Yeah.
So, and this book is very much about that, you know, the complexities of humanity and how we're all different. But nevertheless, you know, we need to get along if we're going to survive and prosper. And the book explores a lot of those themes.
Okay, so there is something I have been doing with all of the authors who are on the podcast, which is just 5 quick questions.
Excellent. I will do my best to be as concise as possible as opposed to my long-winded, rambling answers.
So, well, these are simple questions too, so you can just go with whatever comes off the top of your head. Don't think about them too much.
Marvelous.
So, when you were in high school, what was your favorite book that you read then?
Probably the Dragonlance trilogy, which was later would become a Dungeons and Dragons IP. But it was a trilogy of novels, and it was the first 3 novels ever written set in the Dungeons and Dragons universe. I've reread them since. They're not great. They're all right. They're okay. And I'll taper that alongside Lord of the Rings, which I read around the same age, found very heavy going and didn't appreciate it so much until I read it when I was older and I could digest it a bit better, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Lord of the Rings and the Dragonlance trilogy, 2 fantasy series for sure. I tell you what, the first novel that I ever read, I can tell you now, was The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Oh, good one.
Which I absolutely loved. And I also loved the animated version of that book. I wanted to walk through the wardrobe and find another world when I was a kid, you know.
Yeah, I think most of us did.
Yeah.
Okay, question 2.
Question 2. Did I score? How many points did I get for the first one? Was that a 5-pointer?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, very good.
If there is any one of your works, you can do this with the scripts or with your books that you've done.
Yeah.
That you could go back and rework now, what would you like to redo?
Wow, that's interesting. Go back and redo. Well, in lockdown, I wrote 30 scripts, and 10 of those 30 scripts were the 10 episodes of Diamonds in the Sky Book 1. And I made sure I wrote the scripts with a producer's head on, and I kind of knew the actors that I wanted. So if I was to rewrite anything, I might go back and rewrite the first Diamonds book so it matches the first season that I've written, if that makes sense. But then it would become a really big, meaty book, and then I'd also have to rewrite the second book. So I don't think it's essential that the TV show exactly matches the book. I've just expanded the characters, and you just meet some of the characters earlier than you would have done. But maybe I'd do that, I guess.
Okay, question 3.
Yeah.
Who is your absolute favorite author to go and read when you just want to relax and not think too much? Just have a good read.
Let me look around at my bookcase. Just a book to relax to. That's a good question. Well, I'll tell you what. S2RB. So he wrote a book called This Way to the Spaceship. And it's kind of a sort of semi-biographical novel about his career, but he's also fascinated in UFOs, which is why I wrote a character for him in Diamonds in the Sky. When I got his book, I thought this book is going to be fun. And the reason I bought the book was to cheer myself up because I was going through a bad time at the time. And then he also wrote a children's book called The Adventures of Buttons McGinty. Now, any book that's got a character in it called Buttons McGinty, I don't really care what it's about. I'm definitely going to buy it. So, and I've got the first 2 of those. I think the 3rd and 4th ones are out now. And The Adventures of Buttons McGinty is a children's book, written like a journal, but it's very accessible for adults. It's almost like an episode of The Simpsons where it's got that great humor for kids, but it's also got lots of in-jokes for adults. And Rhys Darby's very clever at doing that. So, yeah, if I want to relax, I'm going to read something by him.
It's pretty sad. The thing that I know him best from is Jumanji.
Yeah, and he says when he goes to places like Japan, people come up to him and they go, Jumanji! And he says that's what he gets recognized for on the street all the time because it was such a big thing.
Yeah.
And, he was the best thing in it, in my opinion.
Now, do you ever work with professional editors?
I worked with a proofreader who also did do editing, but I could only afford to pay them for a proof for the first book. But they also suggested some edits for me, I mean, would I work with a professional editor if I could afford to do so every time? Absolutely, because I think they kind of have that role of a bit like a producer on a movie. If you've got a producer who is passionate about the same story that you're trying to tell, but it's also their job to maybe make the story a bit leaner where it can be leaner. Again, it comes down to David Bellacci's advice to me. If you can write something in 2 words instead of 200, then say it in 2. It's their job to do that. It's the editor's job to suggest where you can make cuts. And they don't come with the emotional attachment that you have to a story. So it's easier for them to make those suggestions and tell you why, and for you then to absorb that information and make those decisions. And I think I would. If I could afford it, I would have one on every book. Yeah.
We still have one more question in our 5 quick questions.
Yeah, our 5 not so quick questions. You forgot that it was me. We've just gone off on all kinds of random topics. I'm sorry. Thought we got to the end of that bit, actually. I'd even forgotten we were on that bit. Okay, question.
It's surprising.
Question
it's surprising
5.
how it's surprising how often these quick questions go off rails.
Yeah, go on.
See, this is bad about the two of us trying to have an interview together.
I know, 2 people with brain damage and memory issues. What could go wrong? I can't even remember what the last question was that you just asked me. That's gone already. Right, so we can't remember question 5.
I remember what it was.
Question 5. Quick. We're back to quick question 5, and I'm going to be really quick on my answer. Question 5.
I know that a lot of your friends have posted pictures for you of them with a copy of one of your books.
Correct.
Who is the most surprising or favorite picture that you have gotten?
Damn, I've had quite a lot. The best one was probably from Donald Logue, who's an American actor who I've never met but have spoken to many times. I have written parts for him in things, including a character in Diamonds in the Sky. And he took a picture of him with the first book at the film studio in New York where he was filming Gotham.
Oh, nice.
I mean, second favorite to that would be Jason Fleming, the actor Jason Fleming, very good friend of mine, worked with him about 7 times. And he took a picture of the book and he gave me a quote, which was the best book series since Game of Thrones. So that was very nice of him. And, I had them from all over the world. I mean, I've got one of somebody next to the Empire State Building and another one of somebody out in the Australian outback and, California and various places. So it's nice. So I've said that to people with the last book, So, yeah, definitely that one. There you go. Short answer. Done. Finito.
So now, Why don't you explain what the Outcast Creative is?
So the Outcast Creative is started off as a Monday night acting class that Dick and Tolson and I sort of approached Dickon with the idea of doing an acting class a bit like the late Graham Fletcher Cooks that we both taught at. And in the end, we decided to come up with a different name, and I came up with the name The Outcasts, but I didn't want it to sound too pandemic-y, even though this is before the pandemic. So it was called The Outcast Creative, and we set it up in May of 2019 was when we talked about it. And then I think our first class was in September of that year. And it was just going really well, and the numbers were really good. And then the pandemic hit. And then what we did was we ended up doing lots of script reads using Zoom online. And at one point I was doing 3 or 4 of these a week. And that was how I ended up writing so many scripts in 2020, because I actually ran out of scripts for the actors to read. And that's when I thought, oh, well, I could write the Diamonds in the Sky pilot. And everybody loved it so much. At the end of it, everyone was like, oh, yeah, we're reading episode 2 next week, aren't we? And I was like, yeah, of course we are. I haven't written it yet, but yeah, sure. So in that 7 days, I not only did I write episode 2, but I was halfway through episode 3 as well by the time they read episode 2. And actually, by the time they were on episode 5, I was on 7. And by the time they were on 7, I was done. I'd written all 10. So that's
did you post those up anywhere?
Those scripts are also going to be published.
No,
I'm going to.
The script reads.
Oh, the read-throughs.
Yeah. Did you post that up anywhere?
The read-throughs were not recorded.
Okay.
But but what came out of that was then, you know, obviously the pandemic wasn't going away and it was going into 2021. And what came out of that towards the end of 2020 was I was saying, I think we can use live streaming of Zoom via YouTube. I think we can do some sort of performance. And everybody was really on board with it. And we did about 4 or 5 plays that way, and we had green screen backgrounds for the actors. Everybody got green screens and people put costumes on, and so we did these performances, and there are 5 of those on the channel. There's Persecution, which is a true story 4-part drama. There's 13 Seconds in Kent State, which is an epic mini-series that I wrote for television.
That's the one that I saw, was the Kent State one.
Yeah, we really went all out on that one. That one is available on Amazon as a book, it's the book of the screenplays, you know. Mm-hmm. And then we did a Shakespeare, like a modern Shakespeare of Henry V set in World War II. And I think we did one other one. I think we are going to do one more online play, but now, of course, the world has gone back to normal. So we've predominantly gone back to the Monday night acting classes again, but then I kind of wanted to do something with the YouTube channel. And so it's because it's my channel, and I decided, okay, well, I'm now going to use it primarily as a place to interview people who are creative. You know, I mean, I do actually want to do a Meet the Authors episode, but I want to have like 2 or 3 authors on there. 3 would be a good number. So we could get you as one of the people on there for that. But, you know, and I want authors who write in different genres, you know. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So anybody creative, I'm always up for interviewing them. I've only got I'm just coming up to 1,000 subscribers now. I'm about 100 shy of 1,000, 130, I think, and I'm determined to get to over 1,000 because that's when your channel becomes monetized. But you know, you have to be up there in the hundreds of thousands to make any money on YouTube.
Now, you have been putting a lot of the scripts that you have written into book form now. What was the first one that you did that with?
Persecution, which was the true story of Colin Stagg, who was wrongly accused of murdering Rachel Nickell on Wimbledon Common in 1992. And he was prosecuted by the police, who thought he was guilty, vilified by the press and the public, destroyed his whole life. Fortunately, eventually the real guy was caught, but this guy went to hell and back. And then I found out Channel 4 were doing a 4-part drama about this same story, and they were doing it from the police officer's point of view. I heard that this series was in production, and I thought, I've been trying to get my version made of that same story, but told from the guy who went through it. You know, no, we can't tell his point of view. I think the undercover woman police officer is the victim here. We're going to tell her story. Complete nonsense. So it was one of the scripts we'd read in lockdown. I thought, right, we're going to do a live broadcast of that script, like a radio play. And that was the first one we did on YouTube. It's on the channel. You can see it. And then I also released it as a script on Amazon. And I got all of that out before the Channel 4 version even came out.
So how many scripts do you have out in book form right now?
I think 4 or 5. I've got 5. I've got Persecution, which is a mini-series. 13 Seconds in Kent State, which is a mini-series made for TV. Sticks and Stones, which is the script of the play that I've put on London twice, which is about 3 families and their lives in the conflict in Northern Ireland over 30 years. And that was, like I said, that was a play that was done for stage. I've got the Pegasus Bridge film, which was a film I worked on for 3 years that didn't happen. True World War II story, think kind of British Saving Private Ryan, not quite the same storyline, but similar kind of thing. And then I've got 2 episodes of Paratrooper, which is a European version of Band of Brothers. They just dropped yesterday. So I think it's those five. Oh, and 11 Years Down the River, which is a play that I did in the early 2000s, 2001. And that is about the Marchioness disaster, which is a true story about a boat that got rammed by another boat on the River Thames, and a lot of people died, and there was a cover-up and that kind of thing. So, I guess about 6, I think, and quite a few more on the way. I'm trying to put as many of them out as I can.
I don't know if anybody will ever actually look at the things that are in the front of your books, but it's been fun getting to collaborate with you on laying out your covers for some of those.
Yeah, you've been fantastic with that.
I like what you always call me, though. Whenever you're contacting me and you want help, you always send me a cute little message.
Oh, I call you the Shari 9000 computer. Yeah,
that's it.
I'm great with writing and storylines and characters and all that kind of thing, but I'm crap with Photoshop and layouts. And I know what I want for my book cover designs. I always come up with great ideas and concepts, and I'm like, I want this face here and this face here, and can you put this here? And so I've usually got the concept, but it's putting all the pieces of the jigsaw together using the various, whatever software is required. That stuff is usually beyond my capabilities.
So because of the stuff that we've been working on, it's like I am starting to get better at overlays. I'm not good at it yet, but I'm getting better.
Well, I'm very glad that the highly paid jobs that I keep giving you is leading to your improvement in your skill areas. There's no extra charge from me for that.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. I'm glad there is actually a benefit both ways, you know.
So now, what do you have coming up next? Because I know you always have something on the book.
Well, my plan is, because I've got more scripts on my computer than I could ever make as films in my lifetime, or that could ever be made as films in my lifetime. So at the moment, my plan is actually to publish as many of my scripts as I can. Paratrooper, which is my European Band of Brothers thing, I've just 2 episodes of that. There's going to be 2 episodes per book. The first one's just dropped. So if you just put in Paratrooper, the screenplays, it's on Amazon. And then I've got 7 of the 12 episodes written. So I'm going to publish all of those. The rest of them are on their way. And I hope to get as many of those out this year as possible. I've got 1988, which is basically a straight translation of my teenage diary from 1988, when I was a young teenager seeking adventure and love in the world. And it's quite weird reading the entries, because I sort of don't recognize the person, but then kind of do, that I was then. So that's coming out, and that also contains reviews of all the films that I saw that year. And I saw some amazing films that year, including Die Hard, RoboCop, The Untouchables. You know, these were all films that were sort of coming out around that era. Predator. So it was a great year for movies, 88. Oh, yeah. Really, really good year for movies. Big came out that year. So Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Field of Dreams, you know, the list goes on. And some really great films in there. And I kind of review them both as I kind of saw them then and how I feel about them now. And I give a rating out of 10. And I saw 130 films that year, and I'm reviewing about 90 of them in the book. So, and they all get reviewed on the entry of the diary where I saw them. So it's quite an interesting book. It's kind of very much a capsule of the culture of that time, all pre-internet, when we all had Walkmans and, you know, still went to bars to meet people to date, and everybody hung out at the mall in America, and malls were still a thing. You know, there were still malls that were places of community almost. And it was the first year I went to the States, so you get my whole breakdown of that as well. So that's coming out. I've been working on a standalone novel called RTA London. I don't know that will come out this year, but that's about RTA stands for Roaming Terror Attack in British intelligence, and that's their biggest fear, is basically a bunch of terrorists with a load of automatic weapons, you know, roam around in cars and fire them into random hotspots in London. British intelligence have thwarted. They have stopped dozens of those from happening that we don't hear about. I've got a couple of friends that work in those services, and one of them just said to me, I mean, this is the only thing they would tell me. You have no idea how many of those we have stopped, and you just don't hear about them. Mm-hmm. And I dread to think, and I thought, well, that's a really interesting premise for a movie. And but I want to write it as a book because I could never afford to make it as a film. So I'm going to make that as a standalone book. But I think a couple of the characters from Diamonds in the Sky are going to be in it. So it's set in the same universe, but before the ships arrive.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I might have a couple of my characters. I think I might have my political character in it, who's a lot of fun, and the one with the naughty girlfriend and everything. So that's a book that I'm going to do at some point. Diamonds in the Sky book 3, which is called All Over the World, which is named after the song by ELO, which gets played in all over the world in the story on every device known to man at the same time, which is quite an interesting thing that happens. That's in the works. I've got a lot more work to do on it. I just don't know. It's just a book that I'm not in the right headspace to complete right now. I've got a lot going on in my life I'm trying to do stuff that I can manage, and publishing scripts that I've already done a lot of work on is manageable for me right now.
What is the one thing that you want people to take away from this interview about you?
Oh, the one thing. Well, I'd like to think that I'm a very unique individual who's passionate about the stories that I tell, and I want them to be engrossing for the reader. I want you to be able to visualize them, the stories. My range of narratives that I tackle is extremely varied. It's like a bag of Haribos, you know. Everybody's got their favorite sweet in there. So you're not going to love all of the stuff. You might not be interested in the historical stuff. Maybe you like the sci-fi or the true story drama. Crime stuff is more your bag. You like that stuff. There's going to be something for you. I like to think that my content is very accessible to the disconcerted reader. You know, there's something for everyone somewhere. So just check out what's available and see what you fancy. And I'm accessible too. You know, you can find me on Facebook pretty easily. You can find me on Twitter pretty easily. Lance Nielsen WD on Twitter, at Lance Nielsen WD. Nielsen spelled the Danish way, Nielsen, and Lance Steen Anthony Nielsen on the Facebook. And I do acting coaching as a sideline. I also do script writing workshops as a sideline. I don't think I'm good enough I'm not an experienced enough author to do any kind of workshop on writing a book, but I can do workshops on writing outlines and plots, because I don't believe that there's a big difference between that with scripts and books. I think the principles are all the same. Mm-hmm. So that is something I can help people with. And that's all stuff I do for a living on the side, you know.
Well, and all of your important links are going to be listed in the description of the podcast, and they're also going to appear on the podcast page on our website at burkhartbooks.com/podcast.
Fantastic. I'll expect a minimum of at least 3 extra book sales within a 48-hour period of that going live, hopefully.
I will do my best.
Even if you buy them all yourself. Yeah, I know that's great. And I'm always up for being a guest on people's channels, podcasts, YouTube, whatever. And again, I'm also up for having guests on my channel. So do subscribe to The Outcast Creative on YouTube. If you've got a creative project you're involved with, you know, as long as it's something interesting, it's a little bit further than the concept stage, I can see you're passionate about it and you want a bit of exposure, get in touch and maybe we can do an episode about it, you know. So
I will make sure that link is in the description.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing this. You're always so much fun to talk to.
And that's just in normal life. Yeah. Thank you. Well, no, thanks so much for having me on, and all your listeners out there. Never forget to tell the people that you care about that you love them. So if there's someone you haven't done that for lately, pick up the phone and do it now.
That is definitely some good advice from Lance. Now, I hope you enjoyed that. We have so much fun whenever we get together and start talking. So it's sometimes kind of difficult to remind ourselves that we're actually doing a podcast and we need to be serious. But it's always so much fun talking to him. Now, as promised, I'm going to tell you about all of the fantastic author guests that I have coming up in the next month and a half. You are not going to believe this. Okay, starting next week in episode 58 on March 22nd, I have Dr. David J. Gibson, a professor of botany at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, where he does field research and teaches. But he is also a published author of several books, But his latest is Planting Clues: How Plants Solve Crimes. We had an incredible discussion. He is so fascinating. And the historical references that he was making to botany in fiction work was just mind-boggling. I haven't read a lot of these authors, and it never stuck with me what I was reading at that time. And so now I'm thinking I need to go back and read some of these authors. It was just such an enlightening conversation. You're going to love it. Then on March 29th, episode 59, we have Linnea Denoto. She talks about her debut sci-fi novel, Lithoflora the Chrysalis. And I can tell you, I started reading this book, and just within the first few pages, I was hooked. I love her style. I love her description. It drew me in. It's something that I cannot wait to finish. It is just so great, and you're going to love hearing from her. She was just such a great interview. She's a total sweetheart. You're going to love her, and you're going to want to check out her book. Then I get to talk to Kelly Florence. She is one half of the writing team with her partner, Meg Haftel. They write the Science of series. They have got a number of books in this series. I have started reading The Science of Monsters because I am a huge, huge Universal Studios monster fan. And I love all of those old monster movies, even some of the more recent ones. The insights in this book were just really giving me a whole new way to look at all of these monsters that I've always loved. Then I finally have my cozy mystery author. Steph Levine is going to be coming on to talk about her book, The Sunshine State of Crime. She has got such a fantastic voice in her books. I started reading this one, and she has humor, she has action. She gives you everything that you want in a cozy mystery. It's just an enjoyable read, and sometimes that's what you need. Just a book that you can grab a tea and a blanket and sit back and just fall into the book for a while. And Steph definitely delivers. So I suggest you subscribe to my podcast because you do not want to miss any of these great authors, and there are more coming all the time. And I think now would be the perfect time to remind all of you that I write books too. I'm currently writing the Into the West Saga serial as Stephen Burkhart. And if you go to www.burkhartbooks.com, burkhartbooks.com/books, BOOKS, you can find all of the books that are available in this series right now. So be sure to check us out. Remember, if you love books like we do, you do not want to miss this podcast. You need to go forth, subscribe to my podcast, and then be very happy. I know I will be.